the context is different, and some of the technical, tactical, and physical features are different. But mentally, there's a great deal of commonality, because when you're going into the arena to swim 100 meters breaststroke in the Olympic final, it's just the same sort of pressure and challenge that a young footballer would get going down the tunnel, stepping out on the field at Old Trafford. So there are commonalities in terms of, have you got a mindset that can deal with pressure and fatigue? Have you got a mindset that can deal with playing in the arena where the crowd is and where the stakes are high? Can you take responsibility and accountability? That would apply very much in football, very much in basketball, very much in rugby, very much in swimming. So if you go through any sport, the mind is controlling the performance, and training the mind in any sport would have very many similarities.
The VAR Show. The one place for your weekly football update.
So hello, a very warm welcome to the VAR show, the show which talks about always major football leagues in detail. Today we are going to continue the theme of interviews, and we have renowned sports psychologist Mr. Bill Beswick with us. So without wasting much time, I would like to first thank Bill for coming on the show. Thank you and welcome to the show. And I would like to begin by asking you, how are you and what are you doing these days?
Well, I'm fine. Thank you for inviting me. I'm in lockdown, so that means mostly confined to home. But that has an advantage for me in the sense that I've been able to complete a new book and also write a chapter for another book that's being produced in America. So I've been able to focus on my writing rather than being with teams.
Definitely. And you have been involved, you have one of the most famous names in relation to sports psychology. What inspired you to pursue psychology in the first place?
Well, I'd studied psychology at university, and I was interested to begin with. But really, the link with psychology and sport came from when I had 5 years as national basketball coach for England. And I realized the more I coached, the more I understood that performance, especially at the highest level, especially under stress and fatigue, was down to the mindset of the player and the team and the coach. And I became fascinated with situations in elite sport where a player would take the ball bravely under pressure at the end of a game and make the big shot. And some players wouldn't take the ball, didn't want the responsibility. And I began to think that there is an area of performance that we're not really familiar with. We're familiar with physical, technical, and tactical, but we're not familiar with mental. So that was the trigger for me thinking, I would like to explore this. I would like to become better at this. I think there's a need for this in sport.
Of course, and like you said, how you started with your connections with the basketball. How did you get involved in football?
That was down to a chap called Mick Wadsworth, who was a Football Association coach. And he had a novel idea of running a course for youth coaches where he brought 4 different people from 4 different sports and asked them what football could learn from their sports. And I was in the evening session, the last session of the day, talking about basketball. But I managed to include some sports psychology within that because I felt that the coaches would like to hear that. And it was the first time they'd heard anything like that. And many of those youth coaches went on to become famous coaches, but one in particular in the audience, an under-17 coach called Steve McClaren, was fascinated with what I had to say and formed a relationship with me as a student of mine. I was his mentor, and he became first-team coach at Derby County 6 months later, and I joined him at Derby County, and that's how it all began.
You mentioned how like basically when you first started out, when like you said you did psychology in your university, probably there was no relation to sports back then, and you figured it out on the way, like through your various jobs that you were doing. And according to you, how important in terms of football, because this show is generally about football, in football, how important is the role of a psychologist in the overall functioning of a club?
I think it's becoming more and more important because more and more we're appreciating how mental strength or mental weakness drives performance. Football games are won in four ways. They're won on the field physically. Can you physically cope with your opponents? Can you outmatch them? Technically, have you got the skills to break their press? Have you got the skills to move the ball where you need it to be on the field, to score, to defend? Tactically, have you got the tactical intelligence to make your formation work? But all those are driven by mental strength. Physical output is driven by mental attitude. Skill level is driven by focus and concentration. Tactical intelligence is driven by ability to learn and adapt. So mental strength is the fundamental basis of high performance. And so I think that increasingly football is beginning to appreciate that the mindset of a player, the mindset of a team, the mindset of a coach is key to winning at the highest level.
And you know, like we are in the middle of a pandemic at least, and they are, like we spoke earlier, like there are talks of vaccine being produced, and we don't know when will be back to normal, you know, even if that happens. How much of this pandemic will it affect the players mentally, you know, like be it in football or any sport?
I think it has a number of impacts, not only on their performance on the field, their relationship with their fellow players and the clubs, the lack of fans, but also the fact that many footballers are playing in different countries to their home, and they will be detached from their home situation. They will know people in their family who are ill and suffering, but will not be able to get back to be with them. They'll be living on their own, mostly, and they will struggle without their normal routines. So I think there's a pervasive influence of the pandemic, which will leave some difficulties for players in the future.
Of course, and you spoke about how the players are playing behind closed doors without fans. How much of that will it, affect the games? Does it affect, because we are seeing huge scorelines, especially in football, in Premier League, what's happening right now? Do you think that is because of the men, psychologically there are no fans?
I think that fans have a major impact, especially on the home team. Football is like territorial. If you're at home, you're defending your territory. Your testosterone is higher. Your adrenaline is functioning. So you tend to do it for the fans. The fans inspire you and will you on to a greater performance. That's extrinsic motivation. Without the fans, you've got to rely on intrinsic motivation coming from within yourself. And for some players and some teams, that will be difficult. But I do think that they're now getting used to the idea of no fans and beginning to build a different type of mental structure to their performance. But it does have an effect, there's no doubt about it.
But don't you think, for some young players who are just starting out, maybe a good thing, maybe because some of them cannot handle the pressure and it is easier to, play without fans? Do you think that is also a factor which is happening?
I think you made a good point there, Sebastius. I think young players might get their introduction to the game a little bit easier. But there's still a moment when those 50,000 people were allowed back in, and the young man has got to look at the fans and go, okay, I can deal with this. So it's only delaying what is inevitable rite of passage.
Of course, and the very basic stuff, coming as a fan or maybe the football enthusiast, we see footballers at least from here, we see them earning a lot of money, probably getting everything they want, and we think like, okay, how can he or she be, uh, have mental health issues? Because for many of them, it's just that money solves everything. At least that is a concept till when someone does not have money. Maybe. So do you think like could you just shed some light as to what is the major problem that players could come across, and which probably is not financially motivated or something?
Well, footballers are ordinary people with extraordinary talent. I suspect that most people are like that. Most of us are ordinary people, but we have a talent for something. Theirs is football. But that doesn't change the fact they're ordinary people, and ordinary people have to deal with many circumstances of life, and life can be difficult, life can be complex. So being a footballer and earning a lot of money doesn't safeguard you from having to drive safely on the streets, from having to make your own meals, from having to deal with your own relationships. So very often the image of the footballer is not the person I see when they come into my office. I see an ordinary young man, possibly a famous young man, but an ordinary young man comes into my office with lots of issues and problems they need help with. Now, football has not been very good at the past of dealing with those problems. It's only wanted to know footballers for what they can produce on the field. But it is beginning to be a little bit better in terms of looking after the whole person. So some of the problems that young people face is it can be very difficult to be an image person where old people know you. You can't walk down the street in privacy. Everywhere you go, you're recognized. If you make a mistake, it's on the front page of the newspaper. So they're ordinary people with lots of ordinary issues, but they have some very special problems by being a person of fame.
And you spoke of a very important topic there. I wanted to ask you, especially with social media these days, do you think there's that extra pressure because everything you put out, or maybe just some player XYZ goes out, he is continuously being photographed and maybe celebrated or scrutinized in social media according to what he or she has been doing. So do you think that has added to the extra pressure of being almost near 100% efficiency in terms of what you put out or how you behave yourself? Does that put extra pressure on the players, because they are also, like you said, normal human beings?
Exactly. It does put a lot of extra pressure on them, and they have to be taught how to deal with that pressure. The pressure's not going to go away, so therefore there should be lots of teaching for young players who are entering the game about how to handle social media, how to deal with the constant attention, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. But they are, as I say, ordinary people, 18, 19, 20, 21. We all made mistakes at that age. We all did silly things at that age. So they need help when they make mistakes to recover from them and move on and regain their life and their career. So there's a whole sort of new area of work in mental health about dealing with the impact of social media and constant attention and image control. And young people need help with that.
Fusanyu, you also said how these days it has been more, people are more vocal about mental health, which was probably a taboo before, maybe even 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years back, probably people would not speak so freely. Why do you think something so important has taken so long to be a mainstream topic?
I think some of that is, when I first started at Derby County, I mentioned Derby County, when I first started, players used to run the other way when they saw me coming down the corridor, because I was the psychologist. And seeing the psychologist was weakness in terms of players and their peer group. That has changed dramatically. And I think that one of the issues was the history and tradition of football being a working class game, a man's game. So a man doesn't talk about their feelings. Now that has changed, and the new generations coming through are much more open about their feelings, much more open and willing to express the fact that they're worried about something, they're anxious about something, they're stressed. That helps a great deal. But there has been a tradition of men keeping quiet when they're concerned and worried and stressed, and that's led to a lot of mental ill health. The mental health industry in football will become much more important, and there'll not be many players in the future who don't have a counsellor, someone they can talk to, a mentor, a thinking partner.
Definitely. And you have worked closely with the England teams, and generally people tend to hype up, or hype up the team in general, and there's immense pressure on the coach and the players. How is the atmosphere there? At least we see from outside, being an keyboard warrior, as to say, because we are basically keyboard warriors, and for us to see, we either scrutinize when anyone does bad. So basically, because of maybe the hype the media has created, how is the pressure in and around the area when you have been there?
The pressure is a step up from club level. International football is very different. You get very little time to prepare. You're mixing with other players from other clubs and trying to come up with a team, a formation, a cohesion, a mindset within 2 or 3 days. And then you're playing in front of 90,000 people on national television, and any mistake you make, any setback you have, any defeat you have is treated very harshly by the media. And unlike club football, where you have another game in 5 days' time to make up and to move on, in international football, you can play a game and have 6, 9, 12 weeks before you play again. So it requires very tough mentality to be an international player. You have to be able to deal with the bad times as well as the good times. And it requires a very high level of toughness. So when we were choosing international players, it wasn't just talent we chose on. We chose on, have they got the character to be able to deal with the pressure of this situation?
So when you said you also one of the criteria is character to deal with the pressure, what do you mean by that? How would you just a basic example, you can take maybe 1,000 penalties in your trainings, but taking one in front of the crowd is very much different. How do you decide who has character, on what basis, or what do you have a test or something? Or
well, we examine their performance under pressure for their club to get clues. Character is discipline, thinking and action under pressure and fatigue. It's being able to do the right things repeatedly. So we examine their club situation, and we examine their ability to think and act in a disciplined way under pressure and fatigue. So maybe if your example of a penalty taker, I would want to examine the penalty taker for the club when they've missed one or had one saved, to see how they respond, how they react, how they deal with that. Because that would give me a test of their character. If they fall apart because they've missed a penalty and are missing the rest of the game, I would be disappointed. If they were able to deal with that and say, it happens, carry on, and then they continued to play well and maybe scored a goal later in the game, I would think that's good character. So character is exemplified by your daily behavior, your consistent behavior. We would look for those consistencies of character and attitude.
Definitely. And you have also worked in other sports, and it may not be one size fits all, but how different is it working in football in comparison to other sports that you have been involved in?
Well, there's some differences, obviously. I work in rugby, basketball, swimming. So the context is different, and some of the technical, tactical, and physical features are different. But mentally, there's a great deal of commonality, because when you're going into the arena to swim 100 meters breaststroke in the Olympic final, it's just the same sort of pressure and challenge that a young footballer would get going down the tunnel, stepping out on the field at Old Trafford. So there are commonalities in terms of, have you got a mindset that can deal with pressure and fatigue? Have you got a mindset that can deal with playing in the arena where the crowd is and where the stakes are high? Can you take responsibility and accountability? That would apply very much in football, very much in basketball, very much in rugby, very much in swimming. So if you go through any sport, the mind is controlling the performance, and training the mind in any sport would have very many similarities.
And I want to ask you, especially in swimming or any other individual sport, do you think the pressure is much more because you have to do it by yourself, whereas in terms of maybe football or any team game, probably even if you make a mistake, you have the whole team to bail you out probably. But in swimming, if you fail, maybe your 4 years of hard work for the Olympic goes in vain. Do you think there's extra pressure in individual sports?
Absolutely. I think that's a very good question. Very good. I do believe that the mental toughness aspect of my work is much more important in individual sports. Even within football, I would say that a striker or a goalkeeper are almost individuals within a team. Either one can define the game. The striker can miss an open chance and feel the pressure. A goalkeeper can miss a save and feel the pressure. Those two have to be mentally very strong. But your example is very good. And I think people like swimmers who are golfers who are on their own for 4 hours and only earn their money by their results, tennis players, I think those are some of the toughest people in sport, because it is easier to share the pain when you have teammates around. But when you have to deal with it on your own, you have to be a very strong person.
Of course, and you mentioned earlier, how you were writing a book, and you have also written in the past in many books in terms of football and maybe other general books also. Did you always want to write a book, or how did this happen? Or was it spontaneous as you grew?
Spontaneous, really. I never had. I didn't plan to become a sports psychologist. I was a teacher, a sports teacher. I'm very happy, but I didn't become a good player at basketball, so I became a coach, and that was interesting, spontaneous but interesting. I enjoyed that, and being a coach led me to being a sports psychologist, and being a sports psychologist led me to being a writer. So nothing was planned, but you have to adapt and evolve in life, and I've always enjoyed new challenges. And writing a book, my first book was on basketball, coaching basketball, came out of the fact that I felt that young coaches coming through had nowhere to go for information. And when I wrote the book on Focus for Soccer, on psychology, I wrote it because coaches, players, young sports psychologists were coming to me for information. There was nowhere else for them to go, because I was one of the first to do this. So they were coming to me and saying, can you help me with this? And I said, well, can't you read about it? And they said, no, we've nowhere to read about it. So I wrote the book for that reason. So the books have been very important to me in terms of sharing. I've had some very good luck in my career to work with some great players and great teams. And the books have been a way of me sharing that good luck with other people and just helping coaches, players and sports psychologists get better at what we do.
Different. And I want to ask you, you were involved in the in England with various sports and various teams, but you also, I think, were with FC Twente in Netherlands, and although you'll have different cultures which maybe determine what uh, problems that players have, what was the difference maybe working in England versus working in Netherlands in terms of like players approaching you? Is it like, because generally the Netherlands, I read a book by David Winner, I forgot the name, I think it was Orange. So
Yes.
it portrays like a more laid back atmosphere compared to maybe England. Do you think like what was your experience?
It was lovely going from England to Holland because there was far less pressure. Football there is more of a job, less of an image. The media is far less attentive and much more calm, less shock horror. And football is respected in Holland as a science and an art. There's a respect for the game, about the way you play the game, the way the game should be played. And the book you mentioned, The Brilliant Orange, pays tribute to that. Johan Cruyff was tribute to that. They believe in the artistry of football, and it was lovely to be part of that. FC Twente was a wonderful experience in my life, and I found the players much more open than British players to discuss the game themselves, their personalities, their strengths, their weaknesses. They came to work each day to do a job. They were far less concerned with image and profile and media profile. They really consider themselves the same as the guy that was painting the wall. He did a job, they did a job. So FC Twente was lovely, and I really enjoyed that experience.
Of course, and you're like you said, like how players are generally, at least in England, are very much conscious of the like image, especially with social media. How long does it take for them? I know it's not one size fits all. Do you think that they are probably conscious, like sharing their problems with you even when they come maybe for a few sessions before they actually open up?
Yeah, the first part of my answer is to say that players don't necessarily seek the image. They don't seek the media. The media seeks them. There are some that seek the media, but vast majority would prefer to get on with playing the game quietly and professionally. And when they do come to see me, the one crucial factor is the confidentiality of our meeting. I don't do much media work. I do this because it's Nepal, and I was fascinated by and honored to get an inquiry from Nepal. So that was lovely. But I don't do much media work. And the point is, a player can come to me and share their innermost fears in the confidence that it stays with me. And it has great benefits for them, because sometimes players get very isolated in life and feel that they're the only one with the problem. And then they come to see me, and I will say to them, "What's your problem?" They tell me, and I say, "Oh, you're the fourth one I've had this year with that problem." "Really? Other players have it?" I say, "Yes, absolutely. A lot of players have it." "Oh, I feel so much better. I thought it was only me." So I think that the main thing is for players of image is that they have to find someone they can share their fears with and open up with, that they trust with confidentiality.
Of course, and you said like how Steve McClaren was your student and you were his mentor, and he basically was instrumental in bringing you to football also, like in various clubs. And more than the players, the coaches are immensely under pressure. How do you deal with them? Like, is it huge? What is the pressure of a player in comparison to a coach?
Oh, I think a coach takes a lot of pressure, because it is not easy to criticize a team. So if the team's playing poorly, the fans will boo. But really, you can't get rid of a team. So the focus goes down on the coach, and the coach becomes the fall guy. So the coach carries that every day. The other thing about coaching is I find that they can get very isolated because they're the person making the decisions. Not everybody will understand why they make the decisions they make. They have to be very strong. And I've found that when I work with football clubs, instinctively, I spend a lot of time with the coach, because if I get the coach right mentally and emotionally, the way they deal with the players will be so much better, so much more positive. So if the coach falls apart mentally and emotionally, their work with the players will begin to disintegrate. So keeping the coach in a good place is a key part of my work. And I do find that they are so pleased to have somebody alongside them they can share with, that can help them, not tell them what to do. I don't tell coaches what to do, by all means. They're the experts, I'm not. But just to listen and to share and to check the evidence and what they're saying, and perhaps just say, maybe you should think about this a different way. And they find that enormously helpful. But you're right, coaches are the toughest of all of them. To be a coach, you have to be one hell of a tough person.
Definitely. And I have last few questions, and this one is sent in by one of the viewers, and his name is Tumoini John, and he has asked this, what in your opinion is the most important quality in a counseling psychologist?
Greetings to our viewer. I think the most important quality is the ability and have empathy. Empathy means being able to put yourself in their shoes. So it might seem that the 19-year-old boy is worried about something that's quite frivolous, but for him, it's really important. And you've got to appreciate that for him, it's really hurting him. So I think listening and empathy, listening carefully. What is the problem? What is this boy trying to say to me? What is this girl trying to say to me? And then empathy. How do they see it? How do they feel? And I think there are many qualities to being a good counsellor, but those two are, for me, I would like to think are my two best qualities.
Definitely. So we have last two questions. The first of the two is, I wanted to ask you, you see, you mentioned character in one of the previous question answers, and I wanted to, you have players with, varying degree of mental strength. You have someone just for the lack of better example, you have Ronaldo and Messi, who are top of the game, and they have been top of the game for quite a while, and you recall a lot of they have been through a lot of abuse, maybe online, and they have failed, and they have come back from it in their own ways. Do you think something like mental strength can be built up, and if so, how?
Oh, it definitely can be built. Definitely. I mean, some youngsters are blessed with it. They've come from families where the way they've been brought up and their parents have dealt with them. So if the parents have had a tough love upbringing, a policy where they've made the child take responsibility and be accountable for all the little things in life, that child is more likely to be able to deal with the stresses and strains of football. But there are many that don't get that upbringing, that are vulnerable. And they can be taught by a sports psychologist, by a counsellor, to change their way of thinking, to become mentally stronger. There are many ways to do this. And I have seen it happen. Normally, people get stronger mentally when they get slightly older. The problem with football is it catches players younger and younger. So talent-wise, they can be ready at 17 to play in the Premier League, but character-wise, they're nowhere near ready. So that's when the intensive teaching has to take place, and they have to have somebody alongside them that can help them interpret how they're feeling. Yes, you're feeling frightened. Every player is. No player goes on the field not feeling anxious. It's a challenge, but players deal with it. And you've got to be somebody who deals with it. Now, let me give you some ideas how to deal with it. So I think that mental strength is key to performance, and it can be taught. And clubs need people in their midst who can teach them, especially to the younger players.
Definitely. And you're I wanted to ask you, so we'll wrap it up with one final question. And you personally, you have had so much, you'd have to talk to so many patients or players who come to you. For yourself, how do you, do you go to another psychologist, or how do you work on yourself, on your mental health?
Subhashish, I'm married. That's the answer. Anybody who's married can tell you that their wife becomes the best psychologist in the world. My wife is marvelous in terms of looking after me. So when I become mentally weak, she's there to prod me and make me stronger. When I become mentally too strong and too arrogant, she's there to take me down and make me humble again. So I would say to any male sports psychologist who may need help, get married, because your wife will become the best psychologist you've ever met. They all do.
Of course. And I had one more question. I get many of this inquiries, especially when I have someone who is intersection of maybe sports and maybe medical part. If you had to give a piece of advice to maybe someone who is a psychologist who has maybe completed his study but wants to get involved in football or maybe in sports, because that might be their passion. So how is there any particular way that they can go about, or is it something like they just have to carry on and it happens?
Well, I get lots of inquiries from young people, lots. And I have 3 pieces of advice for them. Continue your studies as far as you can. Get as many qualifications as you can. Get involved in sport. And even at under-8 level, with little ones, any sport, boys and girls, any sport, get involved in sport and get familiar with the language and the context of sport. Be in a dressing room when the team's been beaten. Be in a dressing room when the team's won. Get to feel the experience of sport. And the third one is become a good communicator. Work on your communication skills, because in the end, like coaches, we're only as good as our ability to convey messages, to help people by articulating anxieties and fears and remedies and solutions. So I would say those 3 things. Get qualified as best you can. Get involved in sport and be involved in sport, any age, any gender, and become a good communicator.
Definitely. And on that note, Bill, thank you so much for talking to us, and I wish you all the best for your future endeavors, especially with the new book whose chapter you just started, and hope we can talk again soon. Till then, take care, stay safe. Bye.
Bye, Subhashish. Thank you for talking to me.
Thank you so much.
Player-wise, it would have to be Steven Gerrard, just because, again, before he became a journalist, he was someone I just admired massively in terms of the absolute complete footballer. I think if you were trying to make a footballer in a factory, it would be Steven Gerrard, someone who, I think JB Carragher summed it up best once when he said, Steven Gerrard's biggest strength is he doesn't have any weaknesses.
The stadium. I don't see really need to do that, mainly such a big spending. But it's true that it would be a fantastic stadium. That's not bad, but you have to be careful. And mainly at this moment, when we are going to face a very difficult time,